Hello everyone, we are live once more, and today we're gonna have our coaching session. So next week we're gonna be racing Charlotte, and the coach, like, this is one of the tracks we saw last season. One of the sessions we learned a lot, to be very honest. And now I have a chance to come back here and see our improvement. I did do a few fast laps. I don't remember how my performance was versus the coach from last season. Maybe like we're closer, maybe he will remember. I don't know. But I feel good about it. I feel good about it. Um, we're not where we want to be yet. Like, I'm trying to. I have to configure. I got a new wheel, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But yeah, that's what I was kind of. Okay. I have to configure, and I have no idea how to do it, so we'll do it later. Let me see here. My wife got me a wheel, so we'll try you later, buddy. For now, I'll use you. Let's see if I have to reconfigure it or not. You are like, yeah. Hopefully I don't have to reconfigure you, right? You're configured already. So yeah, this one is configured already. So right now we're just really waiting for the coach. Uh-oh, I don't think this was the right thing to do. Right now we're waiting for the coach. He's gonna ping us on Discord, and we'll go from there. I do have this nice wheel holder that I'll leave here for now. And I already saw the coach pinging us. So let's go to the session. Let's go to the session. Let me also share this. Yeah, I don't like this. Okay, cool. Let me close here. Let's tell the coach we have never been readier for this, and let's see what's going on. There we go.
Good evening, Alan. How are you, brother?
Hello, sir. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Yes, good, thank you, man. Good, thank you. How's your week been so far? Not too bad, all right?
Not too bad, not too bad.
Not too bad. That's good. That's good. How's everything been for you this week? Bit of a flashback to the past for us here today. I feel like this was probably I think it was like the second track we looked at in proceedings. I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, how are you feeling here in comparison to last time you visited?
it's interesting because it's hard to remember, like from six,
Yeah,
7 weeks ago, right?
yeah, for sure.
But definitely, like, overall, I feel better, like more control of the car.
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
question myself about like second gear, third gear, what to do. But it's funny
Yeah,
because
definitely, definitely.
the hairpin that gets to the oval, it's still
Yes.
kicking my butt. So I think
Okay,
I'm
sure.
doing much better now than I was doing before,
Yes.
but it's still
Yes.
like challenging. And I think most of the time, at least the first pass that I had
Yeah.
and I compared it to your time, that was by
Yeah.
far like where I was losing the most time.
Yeah. 100%. So yeah, no, we'll have a look at it today. I got some sort of areas to talk about, I suppose. But how did you get on with Oschersleben? How did you feel with that?
I feel good. Like, it's an interesting track. I don't think I
Yep.
improved the time a lot. I think I improved like 2 or 3 attempts after we talked, which is
Okay.
like, given the difference
Yep.
we have, is significant. But
Yeah.
it's again like being more mindful, controlling the car. One of the things that we have to work at some point soon
Yes.
is I'm
Yes.
awful at overtaking because I never want to
Okay.
try to
Sure.
overtake and crash.
Yes.
So and like the best way to practice overtaking is overtaking people, and then like crashes are gonna
Yes.
happen. But I'm always
Yes.
hesitant to destroy someone's race, so I don't know how to
No,
approach
for
that.
sure. Yeah, no, I understand for sure, and look, no, we definitely will. And I think in especially as we round out this car, over the last probably six-ish weeks of the season, I think definitely something we'll have to have a look at, or even sooner, depending on how we go with just the car and I guess how we're seeing proceedings going every week. But yeah, I mean, look, it's always one of those hardest things because I suppose at the end of the day, like you said, you don't want to go and ruin someone else's race. But at the same time, when you are going to pass someone, you do have to be very affirmative and very confident with your moves because I think a lot of the time it can always be a case of, I mean, from my experiences at least, I've seen so many people put like half moves on a lot of time and they go to put the move on, but it's always a case of they're not confident with it and ends up turning into this thing where you're kind of like half where you're kind of like you're trying to go for the move. The guy that's getting overtaken on knows you're going for the move, but then you don't really commit to it, and then it ends up being this kind of case where you go for it, but then you end up being like side by side with someone else, and then it just kind of becomes a bit of a calamity in all honesty, and that's where of course incidents usually tend to happen because then you're trying to run side by side through an area where you probably shouldn't be side by side, and then something transpires from it, and it all kind of falls apart pretty quickly. So no, it definitely is, and I think for me, like even watching, I think a good example for me was I guess that week at Summit Point. And even watching other clients races at times, I've always sort of seen that in my mind when I watch, in my mind I'm like defend, and they don't defend. And then, knowing people in iRacing, they think that they can be 500 meters back and still go for a move
Yeah.
almost in a way, and they go for it, and then that's where they break really late, really hard, and they just T-bone you, and then you both get crashed out, and then obviously you're kind of obviously a bit aggravated, of course, but again, that whole area can be avoided if you just go defensive, and that's really the biggest thing. So what may be actually quite good for us to do, maybe in the coming weeks is from your races that you're doing throughout the week, maybe a race either where you feel like you run into that issue, or a race where you feel like that area kind of occurs, save that replay, and what we can actually do is we'll do a bit of a walkthrough of the race, and obviously we can talk about your thoughts, your feelings, and I guess explain to you maybe different approaches you could take, or situations that you're in, and what you could do differently, what you could do better, what you did well. And I think that'll be good just to be able to analyze, okay, well, how am I approaching my races, and I guess how am I in myself, would I approach the race that you completed differently, and say how could you do this better. But of course, to that extent as well, you need to be confident in terms of what you're doing, in terms of I guess being side by side, in terms of knowing race situations. So it definitely is a whole process, and I think if we keep traveling on the way we are with
Court
what
easy.
I'm seeing, I think it's going to
Said.
allow us to easily
Why are you mad in the
expand into
thumbnail
that area
LOL?
pretty quickly. Because I think looking at today realistically, and from what I've overviewed, I think the really big thing is that structure wise it's really good, right? I mean we've known that for a couple of weeks now. We've kind of passed that main, I guess, area of really trying to analyze the structure, I suppose. But I think the one big thing, and I'm sure you probably feel a little bit as well, is just still deciding what what we're using in terms of our skill sets at every single corner. Depending on the corner type we're going into, whether we're going to be either having a peak, a hold, a trail off, or whether we're going to having a peak and a trail off, or we're going to be squeezing into the break like we were, for example, at somewhere like Winton, right? And about deciding on what corners we want to be using them for and how we want to kind of be using them. So do you feel like you're actively thinking about that when you're doing your driving now? Like you're thinking about, okay, what skill sets can I apply for particular corners based on their uniqueness? Do you feel like that applies to you a little bit in this case now?
Yeah, every single corner. Every single corner.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think that's where I guess when we look at the lap time in comparison to each other, and when we say, okay, last season when we looked at this last, I think, God, I don't even remember what lap time was in comparison. It was definitely 1.1, 1.2. Definitely was over a second, but now we're within a second. So you can see that, from last season to this, you've already gained a couple of tenths on hand, which, like you said, like as you start to improve and as you start to get better, 2 tenths nearly feels like a second to you when you kind of get into that kind of higher level of time, and when those lap times really become quite close, that amount of time is absolutely humongous. So you take every little benefit that you can get, and it clearly shows that your understanding of the circuit is really good, and you've obviously taken a nice step forward. But I suppose, I mean, when I look at things, and I'll share my screen here so you can see, but when I sort of look at things here in comparison, I think the one thing that yeah you can really see already across the board there is how similar we are in terms of structures, right? I mean, between braking markers, between pressures, realistically we are very very similar to one another, which is obviously fantastic and shows that you're understanding really well what we're talking about. However, as we know so well, and what we've talked about in the past, we know that if there is any sort of slight difference at all, whether it's a pressure difference in the middle, or if it's a pressure difference at the beginning, or if it's either higher or more less, or whatever it may be, that is always going to be time difference, right? And when we are looking at every single sector and we see, okay, maybe one sector's 800ths, one sector's 400ths, one sector's a tenth, you got to think about it and saying, okay, well, what are we doing different, and why is it causing that kind of indifference, right? So realistically, when you look at where the biggest amount of that time disappears for us at this circuit this week, is basically turn 3 and 4 and T12 and 13. Those are your two big kind of time losses in comparison to the whole circuit. Now when you look at turn, in terms of this sort of traces here, in terms of the graph, when we look at turn 3 and 4, which is there, and when we look at turn 12 and 13, you can see those are really the two that when we compare them across the board, bar peak pressures, you can see that those are the two where maybe the trace looks a little bit more, well, a little bit less similar to mine almost in a way, right? You can see there's some kind of some errors in there. Either it's a case of we've done it back to front, as you can see in our overview, you can see that you've done it basically back to front, or you can see in that final corner there, you've kind of gotten up to the pressure, but you've had a little bit of a hesitation almost through there. So when you compare it to looking at somewhere like 9 and 10, and you see how we're looking through 9 and 10, very, very similar. Time isn't that much different. We have a look coming into probably 2 and 6 and 7 there. You can see maybe time isn't very different because it is relatively on the same path. Maybe pressure is a little bit different, and that's where the lap time starts to go. So, I mean, did you have any sort of areas that you were struggling with the most? Were those probably the ones where you were finding maybe the hardest, or do you think it was just a more general case throughout the whole lap for you in a sense?
It's interesting to see like the 3 and 4 because
Yeah,
I think there was like maybe a few laps because I was trying to have the same brake pressure,
yeah,
and then I saw like you were peaking and going down, and then I was
yes,
actually trying to do that, and I completely
yeah,
failed from what I'm seeing here.
yeah,
So that's a funny
okay,
one to
yeah,
see. But then,
yeah,
yeah, like I think overall, and I'm looking here. So the hairpin is
mm,
one.
yeah,
I'm much better now at the bus stop than I was like last season. I feel way more confident. I
hmm,
think like the last two corners, even though like I'm still losing a lot of time to you.
yeah, yeah,
That was one that I, at least from last season, I wouldn't feel confident or comfortable, and I would be afraid of like
yeah,
hitting the wall or spinning as I
sure,
was exiting the second curb. And at
yeah,
least the last 2 days, I felt good about it. Like I know there's time
yeah,
to be gained there, but at least I'm
hmm,
not hesitating as I was in the past.
yeah. No, exactly right, and that's of course important. Now, the great thing is as well is it's really good to see that you've adapted to the conditions of the circuit this season as well. Because of course, from my initial thoughts, the thing was way slower. I mean, depending on whatever the conditions they changed from last season to this, it's changed quite dramatically. I mean, probably more so for the sense that, of course, America's getting a little bit warmer now. Obviously, we're pulling out of winter time over there, so of course it's from when we did this track firstly, which was probably a couple months ago now, to now. Obviously, it's getting a little bit warmer, so it's probably more so a case of that. I guess the same time of day or similar time of day to what it was a few months ago, it's going to be ever so slightly warmer. Might be the humidity might be slightly hotter, or might slightly bigger percentage, or whatever it may be. It's clearly affected the track in a pretty extreme way. So I think, yeah, from what we looked at last time, I think you were doing like a 29.1 or 29.2. I did a low 28, whereas now I'm doing a 29.0, and you did basically a high 29. So it's good to see that we're keeping consistent with the conditions as well, and the gap that we had from last season, of course, has decreased, which is obviously amazing. But you're adapting to the conditions really well at the same time too. And are you finding from week to week, obviously going and doing the official races, like you're finding that you're becoming quite good at adapting to the conditions as well? I did read yesterday in the stream. I think the big conversation I saw was about the track state. I think I was
Yeah.
reading a little bit last night, and I think obviously that area is obviously quite important, and I think it does definitely make a difference to the way that the car gets lap time out of the track. But do you tend to notice the difference? Because I think the biggest thing is that from race to race, that's random, right? Or session to session, that can be random. So how are you feeling with conditions from race to race, I suppose, as well?
Yeah, this is something that before I was not to notice. Like, I think like there was so many things wrong with my driving, or like I was so like
Mm.
still like in such early stage of development that
Yeah,
every track, like even if it was the same condition, I would feel like
yeah,
different. Now
yeah,
it's different. So I'm more mindful in trying to find the grip. So whenever I'm doing my
yeah.
out lap of the qualify session, that's where I'm
Hmm.
testing the track to see like what I have there.
Yeah,
Because even from the free practice to like the actual qualify, sometimes it changes.
yes,
And yeah, like I'm just being like way more mindful and trying to
yeah,
understand. And I always remember what I said, like if don't ever change the shape or the pressure, just go earlier
correct,
or later on the brakes. So that's what
exactly,
I've been
yes,
trying to do, and it's been like honestly, it's been just more helpful because I'm not trying to problem solve every track every single time. It's just like I
yeah,
figured out how to drive it, and then I just
yeah.
change my braking markers.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, that's perfect, and I think that's the best way. That's the best way to go about things. Ultimately, I think you've really just got to be quite you've got to be quite sort of adaptable in those sort of areas because yeah, that's what allows you to really get the most out of a racetrack. And I feel like um, luckily, I suppose in the BMW and in the rookie series, it doesn't change super duper drastically. I feel like, in the lower series, they don't change it like crazy. Of course, they change it, but I feel like as you kind of make the step up and you start moving into GT4s or GT3s or P Cup, you feel like maybe from circuit to circuit, it stays obviously the same, quite consistent, but there's a lot more chance of it being like super random in the sense of it can either be really warm or it can either be really, really cold almost in one way or another. So it's yeah, always one of those things where growing that adaptation with the circuit is super duper critical. But no, I think that's great. And again, it was interesting to see that conversation about the track state because for me, like I feel like track state doesn't exactly like directly like impact the feeling that you kind of get or from the car. It doesn't really make you change anything in terms of your driving. I think it more so just genuinely doesn't give the pace out of the car almost in a way. Like you feel like you can be doing the same thing, but because the track state's maybe higher, you probably feel like it's maybe okay, a little bit more slidey potentially, but it just doesn't give you the same amount of lap time. So it's definitely an interesting one for sure. But does it make a super big difference? No, not really. I mean, you don't really think about it too much, but it's just more so something that can always be some sort of effect or give some sort of impact to your lap time overall, which is I think the biggest thing. So yeah, look, let's have a run through here. Have a look what we're looking at. Of course, yeah, it's great to see that I guess from sector to sector, or I guess from corner to corner, those gaps have dropped down, tremendously. I think last time we looked here, we had corners that maybe we were 3 or 4 tenths away from each other last season. So to see that realistically, the highest loss for you is under 2 tenths of a second in a corner is I think fantastic because it means that okay, if we kind of fix this area up, you gain a really, really big chunk of time in comparison to the entire lap time. Because ultimately, yeah, the difference between you and I is 0.802, which is pretty close when you think about in the scheme of things. I mean, the gap between you and I crossing the finish line is one. That's it, pretty much. Less than that value. That's how close we are in a sense. So it's yeah, it's really cool to see, and it's great to see that yeah, coming back through the season now as we'll keep sort of going through. You'll come to some of these circuits that we've been to already, and just being able to kind of make some changes to what we already knew is going to be super good. So T1, look, I think honestly, yeah, braking marker wise, we're there or thereabouts identical. I mean, if anything, it's a couple meters at best. But I think in all honesty here, all you can really see that we've done different in comparison to one another is I probably just peaked the brake a little bit harder than yourself. Um, Now, of course, yeah. I mean, when we think about it, right? We always say, okay, well, what is our group here? What corner grouping are we dealing with here? Are we dealing with a fourth or fifth gear corner? Are we dealing with a third or second gear corner? Just grouping it into your sort of areas. And as we always say, all right, if we're dealing with a coming into a corner in either fifth or sixth gear, whatever it is, we're always going to probably be braking at you're around in between your 50 and 60%, right? You're always going to be aiming for that. If we're braking in our sort of third or fourth gear corners, you're probably going to be aiming for anywhere between 30 probably to 45% out of sort of area, right? So we are in that group right now. So when we think about your pressure in comparison to mine, right? So your peak pressure coming into here is what, 33, whereas mine is 40. So ultimately, both of you and I, we're both in the zone, right? We're both in that kind of range. I guess the way that you've got to kind of look at it is saying, okay, well, when we're thinking about, 0.07 of a second, realistically, yeah, it's a bit of lap time that is barely even visible. It happens all so quickly. But clearly, as you go through, there's a ever so slight difference that obviously can happen in comparison to one another. But I think the one big thing that is obviously quite interesting to see here is more so the fact that, okay, you do break, again, that value there is basically a meter or two. We are that close in terms of braking marker. So braking marker wise is really, really good. I think the interesting thing that you can kind of see here is that, okay, so you've peaked the brake. You've obviously, sort of started to squeeze off your pressure, because this is one of those corners where it's a bit of a peak and trail off, right? Because it is a very high momentum corner. But it's also a case of you actually do get on the power earlier. Now, what's interesting to kind of look at in this sense is that in your mind, you're kind of like, okay, well, how have I ended up going slower here? Because realistically, you've broken ever so slightly earlier. You've broken obviously softer, which kind of means that all the way into the corner, you're going to be carrying more speed, which is obviously what you can see when you look up here, right? So from where you hit the brakes, have a look at this. So faster, you're faster, you're faster, you're faster, you're faster, still faster, pick up the power, and now you start to go slower, right? So in your mind, you probably sit there and question, well, how does that happen? How have I gone from being earlier on the brakes by barely anything? Obviously, softer on the brakes mean that I carry the speed a lot better. Getting on the power earlier as well, right? But then coming out of the corner still slower. Now, this is one of those examples where we've talked about in the past where when you get on the power, we need to try and make sure that on throttle area is as efficient and as quick as it possibly can be, right? Now, when you compare me to you in terms of throttle coming out of T1 here, you can see the difference, right? You can see how much more, I guess, initially affirmative I am with the throttle in comparison to yourself, even though my throttle point starts a little bit later. The difference is that you started earlier, but the efficiency that you were basically able to get up on that throttle was nowhere near as aggressive as what mine was, right? So what's basically happened, yeah, okay, you've started forward momentum a lot earlier, but when I started forward momentum a little bit later, I was able to get to a higher pressure quicker than you, right? Which basically meant that even though you started sooner, it didn't mean that you actually got out of there quicker. So in one way or another, what's happened here is that, that situation that we've dealt with in the past up until this point where, okay, you might break at the same spot or pretty much there or thereabouts. You've broken obviously a little bit softer, carried the speed in a little bit better. As you go to get back on the power, you can get on it quite early, but you kind of feel like you're not able to go from 0 to basically, let's say, 80% pretty much straight away. We always know in this car, it's always got a little bit of like a little bit of a curve at the top. You can't go from 0 to 100 like straight away. You kind of got to sit there and hold it, at that really high end value, and then get to 100. But have you noticed that maybe a little bit in driving through this corner? You feel like a lot of the time you're maybe a little bit more tentative getting on the throttle and getting back onto power to full throttle. Have you felt that resonates with you a little bit?
Yeah, what happens there, and I'm thinking here as we're talking, right?
Mm.
It might be because I'm going too early on the throttle, because
Yeah. Okay.
what happens
Yeah.
is I get pushed against the wall, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if what during the practice, what happened? I hit the wall like 15 times. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
I'm pushing too hard. So I was
Yeah.
trying to find the right spot, like starting to hit, press the throttle earlier. I was kind of trying to find that, and that was kind of it might have been one of my best of these. I don't know, I have to check, but this was
Yeah.
one that I used all the track to the right side, and then like I cut into the left side. But I'm also
Yeah.
looking, you are not there yet, but I'm also looking when you lift and then you go back, that I'm lifting
Yeah.
much later,
Yeah.
which is also very
Yeah.
interesting. It might have to do with the speed.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. So I mean, look, you can see that. Again, we know it's all a big domino effect, right? I mean, because of obviously this, it means that you'll be coming out slower out of turn one. So, of course, when you go to lift into that second corner there, you probably don't need to lift as early because your speed difference comparison to me, at that lift off point, you're probably going a little bit slower than I am, which is obviously what you can probably see. If we go to here, so you can see that. Look at that speed difference, right? 6 kilometers per hour, right? So when I lift, it's obviously because I'm going a lot more quicker. When you lift, now you're just about going faster. So just as you lift, it goes down. Well, we don't even actually go faster. We match up, right? You get to the exact same sort of spot. But by you going a lot deeper, it allows you to kind of match up to me a little bit again. But again, by you matching up there, it probably means that you're going to have some sort of there's going to be some sort of lingering effect, because it doesn't mean that just because you go deeper, you match up to me, and then it ends up being the sort of same thing. There's probably a case of it maybe lingers just a little bit, and as you can see, it does. You can see that obviously I'm gaining all that speed back on you again coming out of the corner. So yeah, you kind of did get that right almost in a way. Realistically, when you do look at that kind of initial braking zone there, you can definitely see that you've broken, yeah. Like, let's actually have a look at how much this distance is just for relativeness. Let me just make the screen smaller there so I can see. So 107 to 104. So yeah, 3 meters is the distance, right? So you've broken 3 meters earlier than me initially coming into the braking zone, but at the back end of the braking zone, you've got off the power way earlier than I have in comparison, right? So you've got off the brake, sorry, way earlier than me. So 183 to 198. So yeah, you've basically gotten off the brake like what, 15 meters earlier than me, right? So you started the braking 3 meters earlier. You broke about 7% less. So think about this logically, right? If you brake 3 meters earlier and 7% less, that's obviously going to mean that you're carrying more speed into the corner, right? So for you to feel like you can brake 3 meters earlier, brake 7% less, carry more speed, but then also get off the brake 15 meters earlier, you're going to run into issues, right? Whereas for me, I'm braking 7% harder, braking 3 meters later, but trailing the braking for 15 meters longer, right? So that then when I get back on the power, I can do it nice and affirmatively, right? So in one way or another, if you did things in the way you have here and actually maybe just trailed the braking a little bit deeper, you could honestly still brake to probably 33%, and it would actually probably work for you. But if you just tried that braking a little bit differently, maybe it wouldn't be exactly 0.00 the difference, but you'd probably be somewhere down at like 0.03 or 0.04 or even 0.02, right? You'd feel like you'd be a lot closer to me in that sort of sense. So I guess thinking about it now and looking back at it, like you kind of felt almost just explained it before, but do you feel like you understand where I'm coming from in that sort of sense? Do you know where that difference is for you? I guess thinking back to your laps, do you know where I guess that little change just needs to be?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, look, again, the structure's where it needs to be, right? And I think, that's always the fantastic thing to see is that when you're doing all this stuff, you're doing it very well, right? I mean, looking back on it probably, 4 or 5 weeks ago now and thinking about, how he would probably go about doing this in comparison to now, it'd be completely different. But it's more so a case of you understanding it all really well. Again, it just comes down to how are we efficiently applying it to every single corner and how well are we applying it to everywhere, because that's where that little difference lies. And I think especially this season in the BMW, there's going to be a case of okay, maximizing that at every circuit, but then saying okay, well, I've maximized that in terms of lap time. How do I do that when I've got 12 other cars around me and I'm trying to battle for a win? How do I keep that consistent in terms of what I'm doing and don't run into any errors or run into any issues with it, I suppose, right? So yeah, look, any questions with turn one there? I mean, not a really big change. I think something just really small. I mean, one to try in both areas, either trying to peak the brake initially more and then trail off, or even keep the same pressure as you are right now and try and trail off longer and see what effect it kind of gives. See if it allows you to get on the power more aggressively. See if it still does the same thing, and just try different things so that again, things aren't a mystery anymore. You find an answer to the error and you can say, okay, well, I've tried in two different sort of alternatives. Which one works better, right? Which one works better for me and which one feels more consistent? Is it better just to brake harder, or is it better just to sort of trail off longer, right? Because again, we can both have our particular ways of going about it. We don't have to be absolutely identical, but we can get to the same lap time in doing our own way. You're really close in the way you've done it here, but it's just more so a case of, well, what if you did it in this extra sense and maybe added a little bit more brake at the end? What would have the differences been? Would you have maybe washed off too much speed that then you would have ended up just being slower anyway? Or would it have actually allowed you to rotate the car a bit better and would have allowed you to get on the power a bit earlier, right? That's always the thing you got to think about. So, no, I think nonetheless, in the sense of, what it is and how it looks, I think that's obviously fantastic. So, keep up the good work with that. I think just, yeah, think about it in those other little sort of ways and, okay, how can I maybe approach it in either this way or that way, and which one is going to work better for me lap by lap, but as well for a consistency kind of sense over a race distance, what's going to work the best for me too. So no, look, I think that's all good. Turn two, I mean, yeah, look, it's just there's not really too much to turn to. I think it's more so just a case of it's a response of whatever you've done at T1. Realistically, if you come out at T1 quicker, you lift off earlier. If you come out at T1 slower, you lift off later, and that's the answer you get. So I don't think T2 is any issue. I think line-wise as well, it looks like exactly where we need to be. So that isn't a problem at all. We're basically 1-to-1 the same. So I think it just shows that you have a really good understanding there. So that's obviously all great. Now, 3 and 4. So I guess this is probably the one where you're probably going to see that it looks the most different, and we've probably done pretty much the absolute opposite to one another through the whole corner. So instead of, like you said right at the beginning, instead of peaking and trailing, you've had a little bit more of a squeeze. So when we think back into the past of where maybe we were doing something like this, maybe we think about it somewhere like Summit Point, for example, coming into that hairpin in the middle, somewhere like that where we were coming through that long right kink, and then you were kind of squeezing into the brake and getting to that harder pressure at the end. Or even you think about maybe Winton almost in a way with a couple of the corners there. Maybe think about in that sense, there's a couple instances where we've had this squeeze, onto the brake and get to the hardest point at the end where you kind of want to carry the entry speed in, and then obviously you slow it up more at the end. And that's exactly what happens, right? By doing it in this way, you just carry way more entry speed than myself, and you just carry a lot more momentum into the corner, but then you factor all that down later in the corner, and you brake a lot harder at the end, and you trail off all that speed, right? So ultimately, at the end of the day, we've just got to basically flip that around. We don't want to be carrying speed into the entry. We want to be carrying speed through the middle almost in one way or another, right? So it's pretty simple, this adjustment. I think we just got to kind of say, okay, well, we need to be more at the start. But I did hear you mention that maybe you tried doing that and you weren't able to make it work. Was that correct?
Not on this
Or
one.
not?
I think on
No,
this
no, on
one,
this
the
one.
thing was I was trying to go light on the brakes, and
Okay.
then it was too light, and then I was like, "Oh
Yeah.
shit, I'm not gonna turn in here." And then I do the final
Yeah.
squeeze,
Yeah.
and then I have to go early on the gas because now I slow down too much. I think
Yeah.
that was like
Yeah.
more in this. I don't like the other laps, but I think
Yeah.
this was one of those that I was going like flat all along instead of going
Yeah.
like peak and
Okay.
down.
Peaking.
And
Yes.
just the
Yes.
fastest lap happened to be like this awful.
Yeah. Okay. No, for sure. For sure. So yeah, look, it's not our normal peak, hold, and try with this corner, even though it might seem like it is. It's not. Because I think the biggest thing is like when you think about it from a peak, hold, and trail perspective, right? Realistically, it's going to be, well, okay, by peaking initially, holding the pressure, and then trailing off, you're finding your pressure at the start, you're holding your pressure until the end, and then obviously you think about the corner, you're turning the whole time, right? So realistically, when we think about braking and what we've talked about up until this point, when do we always turn the steering wheel? When we trail off, right? So the problem is that when you're trying to peak and hold, you're turning the whole way through this corner. So realistically, you're pretty much peaking in that initial straight line, and then you're trailing initially because you're already turning, right? So again, it's always about thinking about in that sense of like, okay, well, what is the car doing? How am I driving the car? And how am I meant to relate that again to all the sort of philosophies I've learned about my braking structure and say, okay, am I peaking and trailing? Am I peaking and holding? But how does that kind of resonate with what I'm doing with the car? Am I keeping the car in a straight line coming into this corner? Am I turning into this corner, right? So in this case, yeah, we're literally turning the whole way through the corner pretty much in one way or another. You always got right hand down steering at any point. You're never really going straight. So the fact of the matter is that, pretty much from that initial pressure, you're always trailing off the brake because you're always turning, right? As we always know so well. When you turn, you trail. So we're turning and then we're literally trailing straight away because that's what the car's doing and that's how we remember our approach and remember our structure. So I think, yeah, look, we just got to be mindful of that, but genuinely, yeah, it's literally just like you're getting onto the peak brake, and then as you start to turn into the corner, you're literally trailing, and in a way, you're just kind of feeling what the car's doing. Like you can see that my trail there isn't exactly super perfect. Like it's not absolutely 100% perfect. There's definitely some adjustment I could have to myself, but I think it's more so a case of you're always just kind of reacting to what the car's feeling a little bit through here. If you feel like you're coming in, and of course, as we said, you're turning literally the whole way through the corner. So of course you're consistently trailing, but if you feel like, there might be a point in the corner you're just like, oh, okay, I just might need a little bit of an extra, like little press a little bit. You can kind of get up it a little bit and then start trailing off again. And you can see that I have a couple little moments where I might make a slight little adjustment, but they're nothing crazy. It's not like we're going from being down at, 5-ish% going all the way up to then 25%. We're going from like 5% to 6% to 10% really. So we're not going from 6% to 25% and then back down to 6%, right? We're kind of being very, very subtle with the input changes. So yeah, look, I think the idea is there. I think you know what you need to do. I think it's just having a little bit of a refresher of like how we want to do it and just, I guess, the reason behind why we're trying to do it. Again, we're trying to not carry the speed in. We're trying to more so wash the speed off coming in, so that obviously as we get to that latter part of the corner, as we get to that final right, you can squeeze back onto the throttle and you don't have any issues. Because the problem is that if you carry too much speed in, of course, brake harder at the end, wash all that speed off, as you probably know so well, the car never wants to get out of this corner in a straight line. It always feels like it's trying to squirm on you coming out of this corner, and you've got to be very, very progressive with the throttle almost in a way. So if you're slowing it down way too much, and then feeling you're kind of having to get on the power very aggressively, you're going to run into issues pretty quickly. So we've just got to kind of think about it in the sense of, okay, well, what keeps the momentum as balanced as possible? What allows us to carry the most consistent speed throughout this whole corner? And realistically, that is by pretty much, progressively washing the speed off from the beginning to basically the point where you get back on the power. As you get back on the power, that's at a nice happy medium where it's not too slow, but it's also not too fast. And it also then just allows you to get back on the power quite aggressively, and off you go, right? And if you can do that, then that'll be obviously fantastic. So no, look, I think that's all good there, man. But yeah, look, did you have any questions with that at all? Is that all good, or
No,
how
it
you
makes
feel about
sense. It makes sense.
that? Yep. Okay, perfect. So that's all fine. So yeah, I mean, realistically, that's where you're losing the most time, and in my opinion, it's probably one of the easiest adjustments to make, because I think it's
I
generally
agree.
just about flipping things upside down. If you look at the way you're doing this trail and you put this point there and this point there, we'd basically be doing the same thing. It's just you're going later and then you're ending it earlier. But it's because, again, because you're braking harder at the end here, you don't feel like this needs to start very early, because, you're getting that slowing down done at the end. So it's, and as well, I should mention that it is also because of the previous corner as well.
Yep.
You were already coming in slower. So why would you need to brake earlier? Right? So it's just all that knock-on effect, as we know so well. So that's all fine. T5 wasn't able to run it flat out here this season, as like probably was last season, which was the big one for me, because I guess my first couple laps that I did, I tried going on the grass, turning in, and then I ended up out in the outside wall on the left-hand side every single time, and I was like, okay, so this isn't working here this season. Badly so. So it clearly just shows me that the track is way warmer, because if I can't take this flat out, then it's obviously got dramas. But I think, you've got to be comfortable with carrying a slide through here this season. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I can mention. Obviously, you can see for me, I don't really get off the throttle that much, in all fairness. I have just a little slight crack of the throttle, but you can kind of see almost in one way or another, two ways we've gone about it here. Either you can lift off earlier, lift off more, get on the power probably more aggressively, nearly get back to full throttle, but you can still see there's a little bit of a linger, or you just try and kind of lift off later, choose a pressure that you want to kind of hold it to consistently, and then kind of, obviously hold that, and then when you feel like it's ready to go again, you can kind of, get back to full throttle. So for me, I guess the value that I found that was quite consistent for me to take this corner, every single time without issue, was pretty much thereabouts, 73-ish%, just above 70% was the kind of area that worked best for me. But I mean, look, how was this corner for you this season? What was your thoughts with this one from the laps that you did?
Yeah, the first thing I tried was go flat, and I did exactly the same thing as you did. Went to the wall.
Yeah.
What I think I can do better here. So when I watch your lap, you go on the exit. You go like all the way. I think you touch the grass as you get to the crest, right? And I'm being a little bit more cautious, and that's why I'm lifting more. But I think even in this lap, I had more space to the left side. And what you're saying, a couple laps I lifted less, a couple I lifted more. I just have to. I think that one of the improvements that I have to make on my driving is get more comfortable and have more domain of the throttle, because a lot of times I try to go like 20% and I go like 50%. On the brakes, I can be very precise, But on the
Yeah.
throttle, I'm not there yet. So I think
Yep.
that's what's
Yep.
playing here.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, yeah, when you look at that value there of the distance, right, you can see that, yeah, we're 1.18 meters away from each other, right? So, I mean, look, a meter isn't that much, but again, you think about a ruler, it probably would be, yeah, a fairly big chunk, a meter ruler in comparison to one another. In terms of how wide I'm getting compared to you are, it's probably the distance of, yeah, nearly a tire width almost in comparison from where you are to where I am in one way or another. So it is a bit of distance when you do think about it in that sense, but I think it's just more so, yeah, one of those things that we kind of got to try and just think about and say, okay, well, is it me just maybe not being as confident as I need to be with the track, or is it just me maybe not using the throttle, as you mentioned, as efficiently as I can? So, again, very small amount of time difference between you and I here. I mean, obviously, 600ths of a second between you and me. It's a very very small amount, but again, when you think about the type of corner we're dealing with, and obviously 600ths of a second being on the table here, it's obviously something to think about. Now, as we mentioned too, right, with the whole kind of gain versus loss, because of the exit that you had out of the previous corner, right, because obviously you think about it, you slowed the car up more, you were obviously able to get on the power earlier, right? So coming down that little back straight, you were actually going faster. So ultimately, coming into here, now roles reversed. Instead of me coming into the corner quicker, you were coming into the corner quicker. So you obviously had to lift off slightly earlier. I could lift off slightly later. But the difference is that because I obviously was carrying slightly less speed because I carried more speed through the previous one, I was able to kind of go a bit deeper, maybe didn't have to lift off as much, and I could get through here easier. Whereas for you, carrying just that ever so slight more momentum probably just adds a bit of a factor that I don't really feel through here. It's something that I don't really feel. And that's actually an interesting area to always think about because, you know, as much as we look at each other here and we compare, I think the big thing is that the way that you do the corners in comparison to me, they're different, right? And if your corners are the previous corners are different and you're getting a different result to what I am, in one way or another, there's no real way that you can do what I'm doing unless you get the other corners right. Because ultimately, every corner you're going to be coming in at a different speed almost. You're either going to be coming in slower or you're going to be coming in faster. Now, if you try to match up what I'm doing when you're getting that previous corner maybe slightly different to me or completing it slightly differently, you're always going to be coming in at a different point. And I think the biggest thing is that you can say, okay, well, I can try and do the same thing, but it's not going to work in a way because you're carrying a different amount of speed, you're carrying a different amount of momentum. And what you're doing, it's got its own unique process. For what I'm doing, it's got its own unique process. But the way that I'm going about the process is the fast way to do the process of the whole circuit, which matches up to each other. But if one of those little key areas don't happen exactly as it needs to, that's where it kind of causes issues. And that's when we always talk about it causes a domino effect, right? Whatever you do at the first corner lingers into the second corner, follows you to the third one, follows you into the fourth one. Can you fix it? Yeah, absolutely. But in all honesty, like if you start a lap in a way and you want to change it mid-lap, you kind of have to compromise. You have to basically say, okay, well, I've got to lose some time. Because if you think about it, right, if you lifted off at the same point as me and tried to lift off at the same pressure as me, who knows? You might have to really compensate on your throttle when you're some way through this corner because if you try and do the same thing initially, it's probably going to understeer because you're probably carrying too much speed. But the way that you're feeling that it's right is you've got to lift off earlier. But again, when you lift off early and do it in your way, you lose time. But the way you're actually doing it for the way the car is being driven is correct. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. But does that approach kind of make sense? Does that idea of things, I guess, make sense to you? That yeah, I mean, unless we make these changes or make the adjustments to be as similar as possible, the way that you feel like you drive the car in terms of this instance comparison to me, it's always going to feel different no matter what you do. Does that make sense to you in a way?
Yeah. I think like what I'm
Yeah.
thinking here is these tracks that have the corners very close to each other, that you don't get
Yeah.
quite a chance of like building up speed.
Correct.
That's are the ones that punish more because if you had like a long
Yes.
straight would be like very very close in terms of speed, so everything else just fall in
Yes.
place like Monza.
Yes.
But here,
Yes. Correct.
if like we're carrying things from the first corner, because the first corner
Yes.
was different, then like T3 T4 is like different, and now like T5 is different because I was
Yes.
braking harder and earlier on the previous
Yes.
corner. I wanted the gas earlier. Now I'm carrying more speed
Yes.
here, so I have to lift earlier, and it's just gonna
Exactly.
happen again the same like over and over and over.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's genuinely a case in one way or another. We got to get T1 exactly where it needs to be. Then what you do through T1 follows into T2. T2 becomes correct, then you come into T3 and you probably feel like you're going quite fast in comparison to normal. So what do? Instead of squeezing into the brake because you're going slower, you brake initially hard into the brake like I'm doing, and you're trailing off, right? So it's all based on momentum feeling that you're having. It's based on if you feel like in the car you're going too fast or you're not going fast enough. You make mentally those adjustments to make sure that those things work in the way that they need to. But if they're not working in the same way as I am and you're not getting those same feelings, then why would you want to give that a go, right? That's almost what it basically comes down to. So yeah, it's always interesting to I suppose think about it in that manner, because yeah, it is quite important in terms of an approach point of view and the difference that it kind of makes. That's the sort of biggest thing. So look, I think yeah, that's just a minor little thing to understand, but I think it's just something that's quite important to keep in mind in that sort of sense. So other than that, I think that's all good. Um, Now 6 and 7. So of course these are the hairpins. So in all fairness, man, like I actually think this is really good in my opinion. I actually think that these two sections, I mean, in comparison to what we were used to from last season when we first had a look at this track, you have a really just a very different understanding to this corner, and I guess the way that you're taking it now. Um, that first right-hander, so coming into 6, you can see that, yeah, I mean, braking marker-wise, we're exactly the same. But the biggest thing is that you can see that, again, based on what we did at the previous corner, the, obviously it's a little bit different again, right? So when you hit the peak, obviously you're coming in slower, so you probably feel like, oh, I don't need to really hold the brake, whereas Gianni is holding the brake, but it's because I'm carrying more speed into the corner in comparison to yourself, right? So it's very much the same sort of situation. So because of how much speed you carry into 6, instead of feeling like this corner is a peak and a hold, you've kind of thought that T6 here is a peak and a trail off, right? So I think it's very much just a case of, we need to try and sort of think about it more in a way of, okay, well, I'm probably going to be carrying more speed into here in the usual case if I get turn 5 right. So I probably need to just hold the brake a little bit more. So that's just a minor little thing. Again, we peaked the brake at the same time. We trailed off the brake at the same time. It's just more so a case of, yeah, I held the brake for longer through the middle, which allowed me then to get on the power earlier, whereas you initially didn't come into the corner as fast, so you didn't feel like you needed to do so. And then, of course, you get on the power a bit later, right? So it's interesting to look at it in that manner where, the differences are so minute, but the results can, I guess, play a big factor in what you sort of do. But I suppose, again, the biggest thing is that then, because, again, it's that domino effect, because you got on the power a little bit later, okay, we got the full throttle really at the same time, but then because you were ever so slightly slower, you carried the throttle in a little bit deeper, and you can see that when you look at it here, see how you've gone that ever so slight amount deeper coming into there, then you jumped on the brake later, you got on the brake a little bit harder, of course, then you get on the brake harder, you trail off a bit earlier. We get on the power pretty much at the same time, but because the car isn't as balanced as what it is for me, it maybe takes you a little bit longer to get back onto full throttle, and then that's where the time sort of goes. Because can you see that knock-on effect that it always causes, right? I mean, just one little thing that makes that big difference almost in a way. You're starting to see that kind of consistency everywhere in one way or another.
Yeah, I do have a question that I'm
Yeah.
seeing here, and I've seen a couple of times,
Yes.
like in other labs and tracks as well.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed, sometimes you have like
Yeah.
a small overlap on the
Hmm.
throttle and the brake. Is that like
Sure.
intentional? Because I've heard like other coaches say like never do this, and I've seen like it's a common
Mm-hmm.
theme. So I never know like if I
Yeah.
should be worried about that or just forget it and just go like what feels right.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense of during the braking zone or during when you're on the brakes like on the brakes, really in your hard part. No, you never want to be on the throttle during the thing, right? Like during an actual braking zone, you never want to be on the throttle because at the end of the day, you got to think about it. You're trying to slow the car down, but when you're obviously on the throttle, you're going to be basically speeding it up. So that bouncy ball, as we always talk about, it kind of forgets what it's actually trying to do. 1 minute it's trying to go forward, then it's trying to go backwards. So in a way, what it does is it just completely, it completely destroys your kind of idea of kind of what you're sort of trying to do in one way or another. But yeah, that is an interesting sort of thing, and you probably do see that. Yeah, I am kind of overlapping my brake and my throttle coming into, I guess, coming into the exit of the braking and into the throttle. Now, why I kind of do that, and it's kind of a case of just like I'm trying to really kind of already preempt when I'm kind of getting back on the power almost in a way. I'm already having my foot they're ready to go almost when I'm pretty much still on the brake pedal. And it's actually interesting because I saw a big Facebook thread on this a few weeks ago, and I saw a fair few people that were commenting over it on Facebook there, and I'll see if I have a photo of it still. But there was a photo of a comparison of telemetry between who was it? Rubens Barrichello and Michael Schumacher. And it was very interesting to see that Michael Schumacher actually was doing things in the way that I'm doing it here, where he was kind of overlapping his brake and his throttle, whereas Rubens Barrichello had more of like a drop off the brake and then holds basically a bit of coasting, and then Reeb gets back onto the throttle almost in a way. And it was a really, really sort of interesting thing to see almost in one way or another, because I was kind of like, well, you think about those two drivers and I guess their performance in comparison to one another, throughout the years. And, they had a very, very different approach. So yeah, I've got the photo here. So I'll send it to you into our chat here, and you can just have a look. So just check it out here. So let me send it in. I'll let you know once it's sent there. So there we go. So it's sent in there. So have a look at that one there. So this is a difference between Michael Schumacher throttle and brake and Rubens Barrichello throttle and brake. So you can see when Michael hits the brakes, you can see he does it a lot like me, right? And like what we both do, where he kind of brakes later, and obviously, and then of course that throttle, as he's on the brake, there's that kind of that sort of there's no really difference, right? When he's going through the braking, the throttle is coming off. There's not like he gets off the throttle first and then gets on the brake, just as what Rubens does, right? So as you can see, the throttle is off and the brakes are on. So, that is because mainly Rubens Barrichello, as you can see there, he was a right foot braker, right? So there's no way in the world that when you're a right foot braker, you can basically have two things going on at one time, right? You're always going to have one thing going on always. Now, you can kind of see, like, during the back end of the braking zone, you can kind of see that, yeah, I mean, the one thing to keep in mind there is you can see Michael Schumacher has the throttle on the whole way through the corner, right? Now, that's a Formula car thing, right? That's a kind of aerodynamics thing almost in a way, is that, having that extra aero that you're able to use in the car being so much lighter, you can get away with things like that. But that's the one thing in a tin top car that we typically can never do, because it's just not going to allow us, well, the mechanical grip that we have just doesn't allow us to achieve, what we want by doing something like that. So that's a big no-no when we're driving in a way. But when you look at the way he kind of gets off the brake and he gets onto the power, it's literally just like he's always got throttle on whenever he's on that brake, but pretty much then as soon as he goes to get on the throttle, there's a little bit of an overlap right at the back end, but then he picks up the throttle in a way. So in a sense, it's not really something that kind of is a benefit or a negative. There's no real gain to it almost in a way. The only gain that I can realistically say is that the time it takes for you to, once you've gotten off the brake to then getting on the throttle, there's always a little bit of a difference, right? It's always going to take you some sense of time to get back on the throttle between getting off the brake. When you're already on the throttle, your foot's already there, right? So the difference between having your foot at 0% and having your foot, for example, at 3%, your foot's already there. So you can push the pedal on, and there's no time it takes for you to push the pedal on. Whereas if you don't have input in, it's going to take you God, it's not even visible the amount of time that it's going to take. You're not even going to be able to think about it. By the time you think about it, your foot's already on the pedal. But there's a gap, there's a distance, right? And whether it's milliseconds or it's whatever the value is, it's time, right? And it's time that it takes to get something to happen. So realistically, in a way, it's just a habit that I've kind of grown into. And I think, again, it's something that I've tried in the real world and it works. I do know that, yeah, a lot of coaches do say, don't do it. But whenever I watch the pro driver do it, or I guess pro driver drive, they're always doing it, right? Whenever I look at people on VRS and do data pack comparisons, a lot of them are doing it. So although it's something that a lot of people say don't do, it's something that I've tried both sim-wise and real-world-wise that works. Is there any real big sort of physical car game with it in terms of weight transfer? No, not really. It's more just so a sense that you're prepared whenever you need to get on the power, but it's more so a case of just, you actually start to get the car putting forward momentum into it again at an earlier point. So yeah, it's something to definitely try. It's not something bad. But do you feel like that's something that you try to do, or is it something that you usually try to kind of just keep everything one-to-one almost in a way? You keep the brake to the brake, and then you keep the throttle to the throttle almost in a sense.
Yeah, so it's something that, like, after start working with you and seeing, like, doing this, it's just like one less thing for me to think about, because I was like so concerned with like overlapping them And now I
Yeah.
see on my laps as well, like sometimes I'm over. It's like it's less frequent, but sometimes I overlap them.
Yeah.
If it was
Yeah.
before trying to fix that, and now I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm gonna ask him the question because if that's not
Yeah.
something I should be like super concerned with, it's just
No.
like
Yeah.
one less thing to work on, and I can focus on other
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the answer. Yeah, it's one less thing to work on. And again, I was out of a car for a whole year, and obviously it's a habit that I developed and something that I found that worked really, really well. And I was interested to see, okay, well, does this work in the real life car? And the answer is yes. It worked in three different real life cars. It worked in the TCR, which interesting with the TCR because the TCR is front wheel drive, and for it to work in a car like that was really, really interesting. So that was obviously one that it worked in quite well. A Trans Am TA2 car, it also worked as well, and an open wheeler S5000 car, it also worked in as well. So three different types of race cars: front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, and then obviously an open wheeler car. It worked across the board in the real life car. So again, I think all it really just gives you is that it makes sure that no matter what you do, from the moment you cross the start finish line to the moment you cross the start finish line again, there's going to be no gaps ever, right? Like we always say, if there's ever any sort of slight gap in between the brake and the throttle, that's going to be some sort of coasting, right? It's going to mean that that bouncy ball is going to have a split second where it has an ability to do whatever the hell it wants, right? It could start to make a process to move to another point of the car, right? But the thing is that once it makes that movement, once you pick up the throttle, it's going to make another movement, right? Whereas if you're always making sure that something is consistently on at all times, it doesn't have a decision to make. It doesn't have that choice to make a movement. You've got it exactly where it needs to be all the time. So that's the one big thing as well. It keeps everything connected and it never leaves any gaps in the system that basically kind of gives you an excuse to say, okay, well, I maybe did that, it caused this to happen, right? There's no excuses in that sort of sense. So yeah, keep it simple. Don't stress about it too much. Make it something that you don't really think about. I mean, you think about, I guess in terms of Formula One sense back in the day, you think about who did better in comparison to Rubens Barrichello and Michael Schumacher. I think you can kind of see who obviously was driving the car better, but I think it's, more so a case of it can be something really, really small that doesn't make a big difference. But again, like you said, it just leaves you as a driver having to think about one less thing, I suppose, in one way or another. So yeah, look, interesting question, and a nice one to ask. But I think honestly, in the way that you're doing it, keep it exactly the same because I think you're doing it just fine. If I noticed it was wrong, I obviously would have mentioned something. But I think obviously, yeah, naturally you're already doing it fine, so it wasn't ever something to really think about. But a good question to ask anyway, just to know, just for your own mindset of going forward. So no, good question to ask there. But yeah, look, I think much better this season through 6 and 7. I think definitely tenfold better. I think, yeah, like I said, it's just that difference of the way you go about that first right-hander of 6 just affects the way that you then go into 7, means that you can go in slightly faster, means you brake harder, then means you slow off more speed, then means you kind of pick up the power maybe slightly earlier, but because you pick it up too early, maybe it understeers, or maybe, as you can see down here, that it understeers a little bit in comparison to myself. You can see that, yeah, you turned in, see if you have to crank maybe a little bit more steering wheel at the apex. It just means that you haven't maybe slowed the car down as efficiently enough, especially in the back end of the trail. You've kind of broken it hard, trailed off too early, and then you've had to kind of use the steering wheel to rotate the car more, right? So as little as the time is, of course, you get in, well, you lose through here, but then as well, you're losing quite a fair bit down that straight as well. And it's just because the exit that you've gotten in comparison to me hasn't been as efficient and hasn't been as good as what you needed it to be. So, yeah, look, a section that's still just making sure all the little things are correct there, but I think mainly just, yeah, again, it all comes down to those previous corners working in conjunction with one another as well. And I think if you can do them, then I think you'll be absolutely sorted. So that's really the biggest thing there. So no, that's all fine. So yeah, any questions about there, or does that make sense to you pretty well?
No, that makes sense.
That's all good. All right, perfect. So yeah, like I said, the straight, right? You're losing time all the way down the straight, so point 0.088. Because realistically, think about it, right? I mean, you were able to get on the power slightly later, maybe a little bit more aggressively, but then in this case, I got the full throttle sooner, which means that I just carried speed out of the corner way better. One thing that I will say as well, if maybe you could open up the steering wheel a little bit more coming out of that corner there, because you can see that you are ending up like a lot tighter than I am on the exit. And that's mainly just probably because through the apex you're having to really sort of crank the steering wheel to get something to happen. But if you can, yeah, just maybe even if you have to do that, which obviously isn't, obviously we don't want that to happen. But if it does happen, just make sure that, yeah, we're kind of opening up the steering wheel, as we get to the apex, because of course you've got all that track to use on the right hand side. So, make sure that you make use of that, I suppose. So yeah, look, other than that, I think that's all okay. Just, yeah, obviously keep that one in mind, and I think that'll be quite helpful. So look, other than that, all good. Um, 9 and 10. So obviously the chicane. Now I looked at this, I looked at this last night before I went to bed, and I was like, this is brilliant. I mean, you can see how nice that looks, in comparison to one another. I think, yeah, in all honesty, it's just a case of, just timing really, and I think a case of, again, what happened at the previous corner. I mean, as you can see, you're coming into here point eight kilometers an hour slower than I am. So, naturally when you brake earlier and you're going slower, you're losing more time, right? So you're kind of like just doubling down almost in a sense there. So the way you're doing it is perfect. I think it's just more so a case of, if we got a better exit coming out of the hairpin, it would have been a bit of a different story. So I don't think it's something to really worry about too much. I think it's just more so something that we got to kind of keep in mind and say, okay, well, the way I'm doing it here, do I need to maybe try and do it in this way, or need to do it in that way to maximize it more? But I mean, realistically, in the case you were in, all it really would have dragged you into a position of doing is braking later. That's all it really would have made you do, because you're going slower. So I think this ultimately isn't you doing the corner wrong. I think you're doing this corner really well, actually. I think it's just more so a case of trying to get as good of an exit as possible out of turn 7. And then obviously just getting that good exit is going to tighten this up for you in a way. So, I mean, yeah, do you feel better through this bus stop? Because, I mean, when you look at it like this, there's really nothing to really sort of mainly comment on there. I think the only thing I could say is maybe, you could pick up the brake a little bit more as you go into the right. But, again, it's more so a case of you're probably carrying a little bit less speed already anyway, that you don't really need to make that adjustment. So, yeah, I mean, how do you feel in your eyes?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I was trying to cut in more the first one and not hit at
Yeah,
all the second one.
yeah, yeah,
Try to go like earlier on the gas, and then I saw
yeah,
your video, and you do like the opposite. You attack
yeah,
last the first one, and the second one
yeah.
you just go for it. And as soon as the car hits the ground, that's when you hit the gas.
Power.
And I think that
Yeah,
adjustment helped me a lot. Like it does, it's not
yeah,
comfortable. It
yeah,
is. It takes like practice to not go to the wall or like not spin the car. But I'm feeling
yeah,
more
yeah.
confident, and I've been able to do that like repeatedly.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, no, that's great. So yeah, look, I think it's ultimately it never feels comfortable in this car. In all honesty, like I feel like this car, with the way that it feels over the bumps, it kind of does turn into a bit of a pogo stick, depending on how you hit it. But I usually feel that, yeah, like if you can hit the second one on the right angle a little bit more, it feels better than hitting the first one more. The first one can just, in my opinion, just can unsettle you maybe a little bit too much. So, yeah, you just got to try and maybe, yeah, as you said, take a little bit less of the first one, take more of the right one, but then as well making sure that, yeah, you're not overshooting the car into the first one as well. You got to be right on that edge with where you kind of want to be there. So no, look, that's all good otherwise. So no, really great, because I remember, yeah, last season this chicane was kind of a tough one for us. So to see you've done that really well was obviously fantastic. So that's all good. And then of course the final corner, as we talked about, in the beginning there, you can see again, really, really good. The only thing that I can say that I see here that's going to probably cause you the issue is that kind of you have that little drop in the middle of the braking zone. So where you initially peak at 49, you go down and drop to 45. So, as we know how sensitive the brake pedal is in those little 1 percentiles, if you're dropping that brake pedal 3-4% in the middle of the braking zone, you're basically telling the car, hey, I want to speed up a little bit, right? So when you obviously go and do that, you do that for that minor little moment. Obviously, you re-squeeze back up to 49%. But then when you go to trail, the car maybe just doesn't react for you in the exact way that you kind of want it to. And then obviously at that point, it causes you to have to turn in really, really aggressively through the first right. And then it probably means that you're probably understeering ever so slightly. So it puts you out of position coming into the second left, right? So it's really important to make sure here, as you can kind of see for me, I start at 50%. In the middle, I'm at 52%. At the end, I'm at 49%. So in excess, I move the pedal around maybe, 2% realistically, but I don't move it downwards. I move it upwards, right? I move it upwards to maybe even slow the car down a little bit more. When you move it downwards, you're basically saying, well, I want to speed the car up. So it's okay to maybe move it a little bit upwards, But to move it downwards, you're basically just doing the one thing that you don't want the car to do. You don't want the car to start to speed up again. You want the car to slow down. So if you feel like you need to make that adjustment in the middle, as I do, as you can see, I go up 3% really. You go down 3%. So just need to try and sort of make sure that, yeah, I think the big thing is that, yeah, this corner, I guess to end with it, this corner you can feel like you're not carrying enough speed coming into here, and as you hit the brakes, you feel like, oh, okay, maybe I can go a bit faster. But it's a very good corner at teasing you in the wrong way and making you think that you're doing it not well. But you just got to stick to your guns and make sure that you're staying nice and efficient and nice and consistent with your inputs. And if you can do that, then you're going to be, on the right track with it all. So yeah, that was another big corner loss for you. And it's always interesting to see, like, well, why did you lose the time here? And ultimately, it's just because you could see with the steering wheel down there, see how much extra steering angle you have to put into the corner, because clearly the car is understeering on you in one way or another, right? So you can see you have nearly 30 degrees more steering input at the apex, and it's just because the car is not turning, right? You can see that, yeah, for you right now, your car is 1 meter to the left. So your car is like nearly aiming for the left curb on the left hand side rather than getting over the right, and then you're able to turn into the left nice and smoothly. So is that something that you took note of? Like, did you feel like maybe, yeah, that was a case that you try to turn it in and it would just trying to drive away from you, the
Yeah,
car a little bit coming into the corner?
what I'm seeing here, and I'm trying to like think what I was thinking at the time of this corner. I think because
Mm.
I went a little bit too early on the brake,
Yeah,
I felt the car was slowing down too much too early, and that's why like I
yeah,
released the brake. And as you said, just change the behavior of the car. I should have just committed to
yeah.
it and then like trail brake
Hmm.
earlier and go on the gas earlier and just like try
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
reduce the issue there. But it does
Yeah,
make sense.
no, yeah, exactly. So, it's something very small that unfortunately costs you nearly 2/10 of a second
Yeah,
through just literally one little input change, which is crazy to see because, I mean, in comparison to all the other corners, it's really probably one of the most minor changes that you've probably done, but it's one of the ones that have cost you nearly the most time on the lap, in all honesty. So yeah, look, I think, it's an easy fix here. I think, like you just said to it and just explained, stay committed to what you're doing. Don't listen to the car. Stay consistent with what you know you probably need to do, or the repetitive structure that you've done, you know, hundreds of times already. Just keep to your guns with it and stick to what you know, because again, sometimes when you listen to the car, again, in the real world, it's a completely different idea. In the real world, when you listen to the car, it's a lot different because you feel sense of speed better. You feel the depth perception's way better. You feel a lot more through your body. You're going to get a lot more vibrations. You get a lot more sense of feedback. In this, it's kind of like all you're listening to, or all you're really trying to read off, is what you feel through the steering wheel and what you see with your eyes. But you don't feel anything through your actual body itself. You only feel it through your arms, realistically, right? And the feeling through your arms give you feedback to your mind, and it makes your mind make a decision. But it's more so a case of, if repetitively you know that majority of the time that this corner you're peaking, you're holding the pressure, you're not moving the pressure, you're holding the pressure, and then you're trailing off. 9 times out of 10, that's probably what's going to work for you. If you feel like, oh, okay, maybe what I'm feeling, it's feeling like it's maybe slowing down a little bit more, you can't trust it, because it's gonna do something that you don't want it to do. So that's why I always say, like, sim racing is a lot about just repetitively doing the same thing over and over and over again, rather than sort of feeling a sort of lot of things. You just kind of say, okay, well, this is the way I want to do it. Let me feel the way that it needs to be done. Once I've felt the way it's done and I do it well, you can just repeat that same input no matter what you feel. Because if you try and go anywhere away from it, you're just going to be going away from the 8 ball almost, in a sense, and you're just going to be basically losing time to whatever the main area is. So I think, yeah, look, Alan, I think really good today. I'm super duper happy. I'm stoked to see that when we look at this in comparison, we're starting to really look down to those really cool structures. I mean, it's crazy to see that. Yeah, I mean, it's been, what, 7 or 8 weeks is really here now, and I think to see that we've literally gone from being a driver that couldn't really hold that peak pressure where we were, to now talking about how to just do it in the right way when you know how to do it, but just applying it in the right way. It just shows that, the structure area of everything you have a really good understanding of. But again, this is that whole factor of, now we've come back to a circuit for the second time. We're going to be revisiting probably a few circuits that we went to already last season, this season, but just saying, okay, well, what am I still doing wrong here that's not allowing me to gain the time? And you're going to kind of just think that, okay, it really just comes down to, okay, the way that I'm approaching, the way that I'm applying, and the way that I'm going about everything that I'm sort of doing in a way. So yeah, man. Look, did you have any questions on your end about anything here today, or is that answered a lot of your questions that you had on your mind?
No, no, I really appreciate it. Like I wasn't quite sure how I was gonna try to improve because
Yeah,
I'm close like to what I can do, right? I'm really like having to break new ground and learn new things in
yeah,
a sense of
yeah,
like behavior, more like than concepts,
yes,
like behavior.
yes,
But you
yes.
put in perspective, and I think I have a couple actionable things I can go to the track and try right now.
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. So no, look, I'm really impressed, man. I think you can see, we're nearly 3,000 iRating now. To see where we started, and to see how quickly it's just gone upwards. It just shows that you have such a good understanding of what you're doing. And again, you can just see from my end to yours, it's generally just about how well you're applying everything in comparison. And I think that's the biggest thing. So yeah, man, look, go away, give it a go. See how you find things, and then yeah, try some obviously racing as we come into next week, and then yeah, I haven't actually looked where we're at for next week, so we'll have to have a look. But yeah, just give that a go and see how you go.
Perfect, man. We'll do. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. You're welcome, Alan. No worries, brother. Alrighty, well, you enjoy the rest of your stream. Good luck, and you look, as always, any questions, you let me know, and you have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Bye bye.
Thanks, Alan. See you, man. Good night, brother. Good night. Bye. Bye.
All right, that was good. That was good. So gives me some things to work on, right? Because one of the things with coaching is in the beginning you have low hanging fruits, and just fix this and you become faster immediately. And now we're repeating the same themes over and over. And even though like I hate repeating themes, the muscle memory, like the what I have to do in the car or in my sim, it has to be different. Like I need to bridge the gap. So it's good to hear his perspective and his opinions on the things that I've been doing because he sees things differently. Sometimes I thought I've done something or I had something specific in mind, and he comes with his perspective, and I realize, oh, like, yeah, it was what I thought was complete garbage. Like, it's not going to work. So, yeah, let's go to the track right now, see if we can find this point 0.8. I want to be like at least my goal this season is to finish the season consistently hitting the 0.5% of his time, being like within 0.5%. Right now we're 0.09% of his time, which is very good, as he said. Like his lap time went up, our lap time went down with the different track conditions, and that just shows like how much we close the gap, right? It wasn't like his time went up and ours went less up. Like we are faster in a slower track condition, which is, I think it's amazing. So let's go to the track here. Remember training, remember the things we have to think about. Oh, am I gonna get a black flag? So here's gonna be like a peak and release, right? We're gonna get about here, then go on the gas. Here I have to like lift less than I'm lifting. Even that's too much, and not hit the brakes there. So he was talking about using the entire track here. I had a small hesitation on my... Let's do the session. I like doing the session because that shows us like improving today, right? What we're doing now and not like what we did 24 hours ago. Here slightly later on the brakes. Commit. And I missed the apex here. It's okay. Just keep spinning. There we go. Alright, as we get close to the finish line, I'm gonna set an active reset point. And this was the corner he said so here's like the commit. Don't drop, don't drop, don't drop, don't drop. And then here. It was not good, but it was better. Alright. And this is the one like I'm holding. So let's go back. Let's go back because this is already garbage. And I was setting it. So here he does like a, and this was not good, okay? But let's go. Let's finish the lap. Having the control of the throttle that I was talking about. Okay. We declared for him.
You'll have to slow down and give up the time game.
So here, remember, peak and release. That wasn't bad. I thought I was gonna hit the sausage. It didn't. So no. So that's what happened yesterday. We're starting to just hit the grass here, and that's gonna be wall. So here's a pick and release. If you haven't realized from the Delta yet, that was complete garbage. And I think I went too early on the brake here. That's why we're gonna coast for a long time. Let's go back, let's just try it again. And this was good. This was good. So here's like where we talk about almost being flat. Let's go back again. Let's try to master this part of the track. Wall is never good. If I'm going too early on the gas, the car's not gonna rotate enough. So, and we also saw that, right? No, that is not good. So let's forget a Delta for a second. I think the Delta is distracting us. Oh, one thing that I also forgot. Hold on. Okay. So that's going to be a peak and release. I do think we can carry slightly more speed there. We didn't use enough of the second curve. So those are the differences we're seeing between what we're practicing, or like what we're seeing in the telemetry, and now. So here, commit. Let's see which sector was best. And I lived too much. There was a lot of track I could have used. This felt slower. I don't know if it was slower, but it felt slower. So that's kind of the uncomfortable part we were talking about during the session, like hitting the sausage of the second one. Just feels like we're gonna lose the car. This felt like garbage, right? It was garbage. Let me just see like how we're doing before. Sector 1 was actually fast, which was good. So we did use like tighter line. And then on the gas here. But if it's too early we hit the grass, and if we hit the grass it's just like game over. Yeah, the problem of going on the gas early is that like you lose rotation entirely. So let's try not to lose rotation there. Maybe slightly less on the brakes here. And again, slightly later here than we did before. I went on the gas slightly later because the car was not planted, which means I didn't hit the second curb or the second sausage in the right angle. And that's how I could really problem solve. Like it's lap after lap, just trying to learn based on what we talked. That was a good one, I feel like. We know this is gone, right? This is not going to be the one. But I still think it's worth it. Keep pushing. And I don't know if you guys realized when you're looking at the Michael Schumacher brake behavior, like he stayed 15% on the gas throughout the corner or throughout the braking zone, which it's just insane. I was watching a video about Senna and how he would be pumping the gas around the corners, and these guys that you see like once in a lifetime, they just have such a unique behavior. You see, like, that's too much, too aggressive. Again, Sector 1 was very good. Missed the apex by a lot. I released too much. As he said, like, we have to get comfortable sliding there. Whenever we cut too much the curb, means it's either we went on brakes too early or too hard, or both. So here, I kind of feel like I have to reduce a bit my force feedback because it's too hard for this track. Like, my hands hurt. We're not truly improving lap time versus last time yet, but at the same time I feel like we are being way more consistent. So this was like wrong for sure, right? Maybe let's try like maybe slightly harder on the gas there. On the brake, sorry. Yeah, I can't go on the gas. Have to coast. Not coast, but no. Lost some time here. Let's do it again. It's just bad. I don't think this was bad. This felt good, so. Let's try to fly here, so again. Maybe in the race, I'll push less in this. Unless like I'm really needing time. Or maybe I just have to get comfortable, right? I think there was a good lap until then, no? No, it wasn't. You see how these things lie, like it fits fast, but it's not. this is raw. This is gonna be like garbage. To save this, I'd have to lift it. Just make sure it's counting. Oh, let's use the delta now. I feel like the
They say you cut the course. You'll have to
Maybe.
slow down and give up the time gain.
okay, the car is like just going sideways too much. Let's focus on getting a better balance here of the car. But we already see that we have like 2 tenths right here, right? It's just amazing how we were like 0.26 faster in the first one, but so much slower in the second one. So what does that mean? Like too much brakes? Again, not quite. Let's problem solve here. Because this one I think we were getting it right. Like, no questions asked here, right? So garbage. Let's do it again. If you go too early, it's gonna be wrong. So we have to think about this. Rinse and repeat. We're not gonna get any good if we're not working on our gaps, right? How am I losing like 0.3? Okay. Let's focus on that second sector now. Let's stop focusing on the first sector and focus on the second sector. So I have to gain back this time on the exit. It's okay to be like slower in. We gotta find a way to be faster out. Brake. still being like 2/10 slower. Ah, we're so close, so close. Let's see the delta here. You see how much time we lose here? It's just insane. Too early. Okay, so that's not no bueno. Okay. Commit. Okay. So I feel like the first sector. Oh, this is also like, okay, so here's the thing. We're comparing ourselves against a different track condition, which should be faster anyway, so let's just go to today and compare with what we're doing today. And we're gonna like improve by doing this. Because I don't have any idea of what track conditions we had there. That could like practice for a race. And here like we know the gap regarding like our difference today from a coach. Yeah, you see like we're much faster than like before, but also when you see like what we're doing today, it's not all of that. We're actually being slower. Let's keep working. This like garbage. Yeah, this hairpin is killing me. Okay, our optimal is down to 1:42.95. But we have to put like that together, that lap together.
That was your fastest lap of the session.
too much of a lift. I could have
Slow
climbed.
down. You got a penalty for cutting the course.
Let's try to say this. All right. I feel like I have to work on this hairpin a lot. But first we need to nail the first corners too. We're not doing bad, but we can definitely do better. That's what I have to do. It's like not a lot on the first curve and much more on the second one without getting a black flag, a penalty. Yeah. It was a good lap though. Didn't beat like our best test of this session. Like hitting the sausage there is suicide. It's funny how we hit the wall and we're still like... too early. I do feel like we're improving. We're not quite getting the time we want yet, but in terms of like understanding what we're doing and repeating the behavior. Yeah, it's early. Just because I said I went on the wall, right? You know, let's try this lap here. Very slow first sectors. So we're gonna finish this lap and we're gonna do like laps without the delta, so we can focus on truly what matters, which is track, apex, exits instead. Let's go. We'll keep pushing. So that was too much of the first curb, not enough for the second. Gotta fix that for the next one. And here I think we're going too late on the board, so slightly earlier. So that was like a 30.1, which I can't say is bad. I don't think it's bad. Let's see. Remember, less of the first one, more of the second one. Yes, yes, yes. I don't have to say this was complete garbage, right? Wait. I think it was good until then. Ah, yeah, close enough. Oh, it's gonna spin. Doesn't need to be a genius to know it was gonna go into the wall, right? Let's try 5 fast laps, but let's not worry so much about being like 100%. Let's like, if this was a race, what could we do in terms of like fast race laps? And I think that's gonna take the pressure out of our shoulders in terms of pushing for the fastest lap ever. It wasn't a bad lap. But my wheel just... I need to find a new rig. Because this is too soft. And my base is just too strong for it. My rig is too soft. So one thing I realized is we need to use some of the like force rotation there to gain time. So let's finish this lap and then 4 more, and let's see if we can improve in like 1 over an hour. So this was a 3078, which is garbage, right? But that gives us less pressure to improve. Like, we don't need to do 29 right now. 30.6 like is enough, because that's exercise. Finding the 95% of the race, not being like under 100% of the time. 30.22, 30.2, right? So let's see if we can improve on that. We're actually having a very good lap. Very, very good lap. Let's just keep working on it. Destroy the lap. We're tracking like 0.15 faster than our fastest lap. And this, the bus stop destroyed us. It's still better than the previous one, so more reasons to celebrate than not to celebrate. At least I feel like we're improving the hairpin. I may need to cut in more like the second one, right? So let's put our good lap here that we remember to compare against the coach before we call it for the day. So this is gonna be wall. This is gonna be wall. It's in the second one. Like, we had I really need to work on this one. Let's try to work on it a bit. It's kind of late, but I feel so close to like getting something decent. Cause like this is already much better, right? Than it was before. I feel, at least I feel like. This feels good. We're improving the hairpin. Come on. Oh, I gotta go slow. Yeah, it doesn't take a genius to see what's very garbage. Bad. So here's a hole. So it has to be like slightly harder, I think. Our optimal is already very good. If you can find the optimal in one lap, that's gonna be phenomenal. You know what? So this one I have to go early.
That was your fastest lap of the
Not
session.
enough though. I do feel like just watching the sectors, it's like sectors 3 and 4 that we have a lot to improve. Just comparing like with what we've done previously, right? So this is garbage. So the first one, we pass the chill, hit the brakes, release, get a good angle here, gas, commit, lift, watch the exit. That was... Maybe let's do that. Hold on. Jesus. Oh, wait. I almost broke my hands here. Oh, too late. Too late. So pass it to peak, release. Nope. One more time. Yeah, I'm tired. I'll just try like one lap without anything. Let's just enjoy this. Just want like a one feel good lap. And that's gonna be this. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. It's not gonna be this. I think we had some good improvement today. Yeah. I think you can call it. We didn't improve our lap time. Let's see, like our last fastest, just against what we've done with the coach. So let me open VRS for a second. Oh, that's not what we want. On laps. So let's see his. And ours is gonna be that one. So this improved. We just have to release more. Trust the car is gonna turn in. Here now we're braking harder, but like at least we got the shape right. How are we in terms of speed? So we have more speed. So here, brake zone. It's interesting. We're going slightly later on the brakes. And that's because we don't have enough speed, but then like we're too fast. That's why we're holding more. But then like he's going on the gas. So slightly earlier on the brakes here. Then these were doing worse now. The shape got right. It's not the other way around anymore. A lot of overlap here too early. Maybe I'm releasing too early because I'm going too hard. So less brake pressure, about 10% less. This one got better, I feel. Because now I understand you have to go on the gas here like this, because this gives the rotation the car. Oh no, this is the first one. This gives me the rotation I need, but he's just going later and more like. Yeah. But this one is going early. We're doing the same things here. He's just like doing everything earlier because he has more speed, like a lot more speed. Bus stop got worse. So there's like a, not a trail, but like a drop and up and drop. And the last one. I think we got like the things that we wanted to get, which were the shapes right. Now it's just practicing. I think we're close. Alright guys, that's it for today. Thank you very much. Tomorrow is Formula Friday. So 10 p.m. Eastern, come here. Let's race some Formula 4s. Have several different tracks that we can try. Let's just have fun, okay?